Hi, Ruchi.
Hello, Rob. How you doing?
Doing great. It has been another great week. It is good to see you. You look good.
Oh, thanks. So do you.
Thanks. Thanks. You look very energized.
Well, it's Friday. It
Yep.
is Holi, which is a celebration for Hindus around the world. The beginning of spring in the Hindu religion.
Oh, that's
So
great. So
yeah,
you feeling refreshed and you're
I
feeling
am. I
like it's
got a
a new
little
season.
outdoor time too today. It was very sunny in Philly.
That's great. That's awesome. So the Robin Ruchi Show, our
Yeah.
episode today is going to be on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
A lot of people are talking about it. It's been around for a while. And what we want to focus on is what are you seeing? What am I seeing? Two different perspectives of the world. And I'd love to hear from you first, and then I'll jump in and share. And I do think one thing we'd like to focus on, in addition to what we're seeing, is let's go a little bit deep. Let's go a little bit provocative and talk about impact. So,
Mm,
what are you seeing?
yeah. Well, let's start with the term DEI,
Yep.
DNI, BD&I. So many organizations call it different things, and I think, that's really important for us to understand, especially as learning professionals and in our field. Different organizations value different things. The crux of everything is always going to be diversity and inclusion. You're always
Yeah.
going to see that that's included because you want a diversity of the team. You want to make sure you're pushing inclusion, but it's interesting, these other letters that might or might not be included: equity,
Yeah.
belonging, and the discussion that I've seen across different organizations, across different sectors, is to what end, the so what
Mhm.
of why
Yeah.
we're doing this, and that really dictates kind of how much your attention your organization pays to the B or the E, the additional letters.
Yeah.
So what I mean by this is, it's not just diversity and inclusion anymore. That's almost table stakes.
Yeah.
Do you have a diverse workforce, and are you being inclusive? Now, that isn't to say that organizations are great at this across the board. There's a lot of work to be done, but at least most more organizations are saying, yes, we understand that that's important.
Yeah.
The last part of this that I think is really interesting is this equity piece.
Hmm.
And this is where impact really comes in. Why do we want a diverse workforce? Why are we pushing inclusion? And a lot of this is because, at least in my experience, is we want to make sure underrepresented folks are actually moving through their career progression in a way where they're getting leadership experience, they're reaching the C suite. The more people we have in leadership seats that look like us, the more
Yep.
that people of color can progress, or
Yep.
women can progress, or women of color can progress. And equity really balances itself on, what are you actually doing and measuring to make sure it happens? What are the systems you're putting in place? And how do you know if you're succeeding or not?
Yep. No, Ruchi, I could not agree more. And as you know, and I think we've shared this before, it's a passion of mine personally. And we've dedicated almost 20% of our resources to programs, pro bono programs, working with different organizations to give women of color, the opportunity to learn about business and business acumen. One of the clients I work with, near and dear to my heart, Paradigm for Parity. And we're right in the middle of a program
Mm,
where we're doing things like teaching strategic thinking, how to read the P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow report. And to your point, why are we doing this? Sure, because we want to create more equity. But the impact is going to have an impact on your business results. And we have representation from many different companies in this program, and they're all thinking, yeah, give me a shot at this. Give me a shot of making an impact. And
mhm.
it's so rewarding to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of the discussions that I've seen, heads of L&D have, heads of D&I have, are what are the metrics we should be looking at?
Yeah.
And I really think some interesting things to think about. One is, what's the turnover and, attrition of certain population groups?
Yeah.
Where are you low right now? Where do you want to be? What does your pipeline look like? And I mean, like, entry pipeline, recruiting pipeline.
Right.
And then what does your leadership pipeline look like, mid manager to C suite? And then I really love when people talk about measuring their sponsorship and mentorship commitments. So, what formalized programs do you have? How are those formalized programs evaluated? How are people matched? What is the commitment you're holding your sponsors and mentors to? And then I think a third element here is just what kind of roles are
Yeah.
your underrepresented populations taking? And how are you giving them more room and space to bring their authentic selves to work? And
Yeah.
that might look like, in terms of measurement, right? That might look like, what percentage of our workforce is taking advantage of our inclusive parental leave?
Mhm.
How well thought out are our policies around medical support, mental health support? How many options do we have to support neurodivergent folks? It's really going beyond just kind of race and gender, which
Yeah.
people have always thought about, and really thinking about the intersections of
Yep.
identities.
Totally agree with you. And it's interesting as you talked about those metrics, turnover, pipeline, mentoring programs. I want to run something by you because it's really interesting. So I had a situation 2 weeks ago. One of the women leaders in one of my other business acumen for women leadership programs came to me because we actually do coaching as part of this and said, I just have great news for you. I am leaving the company. I got this great new job. And my first reaction was, uh-oh, turnover, her company. But her boss was a woman of color and just 2 years into the job, but her boss also coached her, mentored her, got her to the point where now she is moving to a different organization in an even higher level job. So you have to understand when you're looking at those metrics, sometimes things like turnover is actually good because you're creating more people within the workforce that are going to take advantage of those opportunities.
It's good for the individual. I think
Yeah.
what those metrics tell me as an organization is, how are we not making our organization attractive enough for these
Yeah.
folks,
Yeah.
right? I heard a story today from a Asian female executive coach. She's talking about her kind of career pipeline and progression. She said, look, I left one of my first jobs because I asked for more responsibility. I asked for more leadership and they didn't give it to me. And when I left, my CEO had tears in his eyes and he said, I should have given you the chance.
Yeah.
And so you never want to be in that position of regret. You never want to take your people for granted.
Yeah.
And a lot of your underrepresented populations, particularly, that is such a time honored story for them, that it's really crucial for leaders to be aware of that.
Yep. So I want to come back to something you said earlier, and I think it relates to the metrics and how we're looking at things. And you talked about, do organizations actually portray diversity and inclusion? What does the senior leadership team look like? What does the executive leadership team look like? What does that new class of hires look like? And there's some pretty startling data that can come out of asking those questions. But I think it's also about the behaviors. And I think it's also about that recognition, coming back to what you said a few moments ago about the impact. What are you seeing in your world? And I'll show you what I'm seeing in mine.
Yeah. I mean, I think we see a real problem in the pipeline. There's not a wealth of folks of color, at least in the C-suite. And even if we think about sub demographics, right? We think about Asian leaders. In America, at least, South Asian men are much more likely to reach the C suite than East Asian men or East Asian women. I think East Asian women are at the very bottom. Southeast Asian and Asian women are very bottom of that kind of like ceiling for Asian
Yeah.
professionals.
Mm.
And I think, a lot of this is what are the stereotypes that we carry with us when we think
Yeah.
about what classifies leadership?
Yeah.
And then where do people start their journeys? Are they in more technical roles? Are they in more, execution based roles rather than strategic roles? And so, how are you affording those opportunities, especially? And I always focus on race and ethnicity because I
Sure.
feel it very deeply, but other
Yeah.
people will focus on other dimensions. But I think, especially for folks of color in the American context, um, that kind of like early tutelage and attention is so important, because what we're seeing is later on in their career, the numbers are not promising.
Yeah. And when I want to come back and ask you about what you're seeing with Asian women executives, culturally, stereotypes. Is there a breakdown? Is there a differentiation between even types of Asian women in terms of the way you're seeing it? And I ask this question because one of the executives that I was working with at one of our very large Fortune 200 clients was a president of a business unit within a very large conglomerate. Wonderful woman. She got a great new job, was recruited to be the CEO of the competitor organization. So moving from a president of business unit to president. And I know for a fact she's of Japanese descent. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think there is obviously like a lot of difference within the diaspora, right? I think South
Yeah.
Asian women carry different challenges and projections on them than East Asian women and Southeast Asian women. I do think that by and large, in the American context, a lot of the things that Asian women struggle against are, culturally, this expectation of either you're a homemaker or you're not. So you have
Yeah.
to like sacrifice something. And by the way, that's distinct from I think like our white women counterparts, because there's two sides of the coin for us that are both warring with us, both the American context and our country of origin context, both
Mhm.
sides saying you have to be this mother, you have to be this
Yeah.
caretaker. And then the business context. There's other things like this idea of being a shrinking violet or quiet, and you have to like flout that stereotype. So there's lots of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunities for empowerment for Asian women. There's a strong communal influence in our culture. I'll speak personally. I think there's a large impetus and imperative now, especially with anti-Asian hate rising,
Mm.
for the community to really rally around and support one another, and to
Yeah.
think what do we need to succeed and make it happen.
Yep. So follow up on that. Now you got me really thinking. And again, I'll ask you a question. We'll link it back to impact. What are your thoughts? What are you seeing as a follow up in terms of gender pay inequality?
More of the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're still not at parity. And even, when we're looking at statistics, so much of it is couched just as men versus women, and there's no race
Mhm.
breakdown there, right?
Yeah.
And we already know, I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, but it's some amount of cents to the dollar for Black women versus like white women,
Right.
Hispanic Latino women versus Black women, Asian women. There's like
Hmm.
this
Yeah. Yeah.
like confounding amount of disparity the more you think about it. So no, we're not at parity yet. And I think
No.
a huge part of this is also how organizations think about pay.
Yeah.
Um, I think we just live in a time where in general, leaders need to understand what people want, and that pay is a huge part of
Sure.
what makes a job attractive. And then make it okay for people to talk openly about
Yeah.
equality.
I was going to ask you, so what do well-intentioned companies do? So let's assume for a moment that there's a leader within a company and the data is not good and there is a gender pay inequity. What do you do? What's the positive thing to get to the impact?
I mean, evaluate your pay scales, like get a like objective outside
Hmm.
party to
Yeah.
do an analysis, and understand what's driving that, because I guarantee you it's not degrees, it's not, actual qualifications. So really understanding that. And then even alongside pay is thinking about what is the like invisible labor that women are doing,
Mm.
that they're not being paid for, or the things that they're not being evaluated against, but should be, or that should be part of their evaluation to enable a pay raise. For example,
Yeah.
like, I spent a lot of my career being the sole person taking notes, processing what was happening in a meeting, synthesizing what was happening,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
that's invisible labor, because
Yeah.
the men in the room just said you do it, but I was doing the heavy lifting.
And play that out, think that out, and really even today, it's March of 2022. I wonder how many meetings happen today around the world where there was a bunch of people in the room, a bunch of men, and the men are thinking, Yeah, let the woman take the notes, just almost as an unconscious bias.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Interesting.
I also think that this is a controversial opinion, but you
Yeah.
said unconscious bias. I think we need to stop doing unconscious bias trainings. I think we need to stop doing these like implicit bias trainings and say like,
Mm,
we're good. We did that. That's what makes an ally. Like, first of all, a lot of people already know what unconscious bias
right.
is.
Right.
They just are not changing their behavior, right? It's
Right.
not like knowledge enough is not enough. You have to start building these things into how you actually evaluate performance
Yeah.
and structures. So, for example, we think about feedback.
Yeah.
Um, what questions are you putting in a performance evaluation to make sure it's not biased?
Hmm.
How are you structuring your evaluation so it's not just one person with one opinion
Right.
that's carrying the weight?
Right.
So those kind of things are so important, and so many organizations, well intentioned,
Yeah.
think allyship training and implicit bias training are going to be enough to turn the tide, and it's just not.
It's just not. What's the solution? It's just lifting it up. It's making people accountable. It's
I
not giving the excuse of, oh, well, I'm sorry, Ruchi. You know, that was an unconscious bias. I'll do
Well,
better.
that for sure. I think it's a lot more awareness.
Yeah.
I think it's a more holistic awareness.
Hmm.
I think, as unpopular as this opinion might be, we need a
No.
lot more education at
Yeah.
the leadership level around what drives inequity. Just,
Yep.
I talked to a lot of actually Asian executives who had no
Yeah.
idea where the term Asian American came from. I mean, I only learned it three years ago, but it originated as a radical political voting bloc. We were originally just known as like Japanese American, Filipino American, and two activists out of UC Berkeley said, we want to be a voting bloc
Huh.
just like Black Americans, and we're
Yeah.
gonna we're gonna learn from the Black Power movement. And we were founded with this idea of radical communal activism in mind, and now
Hmm.
here we are still suffering from model minority myth, this need to be proximity to whiteness and be accepted at the expense of our authority or our authenticity. I get very passionate about this. I think so much of this is the stuff that will actually help change how leaders think about DEI, understanding and having a deeper knowledge of where these things come from, inequity that we face every day.
I agree with you, and am committed personally and for my company and for what I do to do the right things and lift them up as you share. Ruchi, thank you. Thank you. I love the
Absolutely.
passion. Hopefully for everybody, this was helpful. Again, Rob and Ruchi, we just get together and we talk about things that are real and things that are related to business and learning and development. And this is a difficult conversation, but I think lifting these things up and exploring them and really thinking them through can have, and here it comes, an impact.
And impact. And I'll leave with one last note. I think
Please.
it can be really uncomfortable, especially if you are a leader who does not have a marginalized identity, to think about this, not just personally, but also how do I not alienate my other folks in my organization who are not marginalized? And
Yeah.
my encouragement here is to think about it from a lens of how do we bring everyone into the circle rather than how are we only serving a few people who are already in that circle? So really thinking about bringing everyone in rather than serving just
Mm.
people who are already in that
That's
circle.
so important. That's great. As always, thank you. I learned so much.
Thank
I appreciate it. I love you. And
Love you too, Rob.
let's continue it next time. Thanks,
All
Rich.
right. Thanks, everyone.